Well, you see it all over the news, the talk about inflation. It's certainly something we talk about here on BizTV. We are seeing high inflation rates, maybe the highest we've seen in decades. But is it the highest ever? Here to put us into kind of take the current economic and climate and put into an historical perspective is Dr. Don Frazier, who's back with us. Easy for me to say, right? Right, Dr. Frazier?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, gosh, I miss Jimmy Carter. Now here we are again.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, is this the worst inflation we've ever seen? And of course, Jimmy Carter's, we always talk about the 1970s, but put it in perspective. So I was born in 78. Certainly Jimmy Carter was in office, but I don't remember him at that young age. So put in historical perspective for the rest of us. How does the current inflation stack up with the Jimmy Carter years?
Well, right now, the end has not been written on our current great inflation, but the last great inflation, which really ran from 1965 to about 1982, ran the entire decade of the 70s, slow start, picked up under the Carter administration, topped out at 14% inflation. And really the only thing that put the kibosh on it was we raised interest rates to astronomical usury levels, things like 20% on the Fed rate, and that just put enough cold water on it to cool it down. But it ran for a very long, it had a long run. It was grim.
You know, it's almost like, and government has those levers they can pull. You mentioned raising interest rates, and they've talked about it, they've done it, and they're talking about doing it again. But if you're sitting at the Treasury Department or you're sitting at the Feds and you have a choice, it's like dang if you do, dang if you don't, because you can slow down inflation, but you also could send us quickly into a recession, maybe even the D word, right, if it gets too bad, right?
It is. And so one of the things that people need to understand about the American economy is we've only had the levers to manipulate it like that since the early 20th century. I mean, the Federal Reserve was an attempt at having a central bank. It's written into the Constitution that we should have some sort of centralized national bank, but we never could quite get it to stick in the 19th century. So you had these big whiplash cycles of boom and bust. Now, in terms of American history, that's what propelled a bunch of the immigration into the American West, is you'd go broke in the East and then you'd go remake yourself in the West. So the 20th century, we tried to level that out. The Depression was a big hiccup on that. So then we made adjustments to the financial system there, but we still have these cycles where you have inflationary cycles or recession cycles. So we still haven't figured it out. I mean, there's a lot of levers you can push and pull, but sometimes it feels like somebody's fallen asleep and pushed against the stick and sent us into a nosedive. And I think that a lot of times fiscal policy and political goals are running crosswise to each other. So the great inflation of the 70s was an aftershock of the Great Society, the idea that we're going to essentially do social engineering across the entire spread of the United States. And this is all wrapped up in the civil rights movement and other things that needed to happen. But now we've got social engineering, and it's all being driven by environmental causes. And it's hitting the energy sector especially hard, which is fueling this inflation cycle yet again.
Well, let's talk about the energy sector, because President Biden is blaming Russia. That's his talking point right now. But we were energy independent thanks a lot to Texas. So what happened?
What happened was there was people within the government that are using the available powers of the federal government to bring about social change or economic change that they think serves a greater good. There are people that are enemies of oil and want to see it sooner or later go away. And I want everybody to be running around in electric cars and things like that. So if you have the reins of power, you're going to use those reins of power to try and bring about your vision for the world. And there are people who believe that we should live in an oil-free world. And so you essentially legally dismantle it. This is not the first time this has happened. We saw it against the coal industry before that. We've seen it against the liquor industry with prohibition. We saw that against the slave industry in the 1850s and 60s, where government changed and they started changing what they could in order to make it economically unviable. And that's the same with slavery, same with alcohol, same with controlled substances of other kinds. It's also the same with coal and oil. So it's there are ways that the federal government can get in your business and shut down your business and smile while they're doing it.
Visiting with Dr. Don Frazier. He's the director, by the way, at the Texas Center at Schreiner University. Schreiner.edu is the website. And you are a historian, so I'm curious. I'm going to ask you, we're looking at history right now, as we always do. How do you think history will judge this particular period of time?
Well, again, the end hasn't been written, so we need about a 30-year lag time. But my prediction is, if I had to prognosticate, is that so much of what's going on right now is just plain silly. And I think future generations will be scratching their head like, what were they thinking? They had the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable, as they say. They cared about stuff that really didn't matter as much as they wanted to wring their hands and make it seem like it mattered. So perhaps in the future, we'll figure out that this was all smoke and mirrors hiding some other big issue. Who knows? Maybe alien contact. I have no idea. But I can't imagine that historians in the future are going to be looking at that going, man, they were all so prescient. I think that they're probably going to be saying, what were they thinking?
That's so true. And it'll be interesting as we go along, and Dr. Frazier will continue to have you back, because as we head into, we're not a political show, but politics, they affect business, and we're going to see what happens come the midterm elections. It'll be interesting. So, Dr. Frazier, thank you for your time tonight.
Yep.
And I think it's good.
It's always good to be with you guys.
Absolutely. I think it's good when we talk about what's happening now, always to look at it from a perspective of history. Kind of brings things into a clearer vision. Stick around. We'll be back after this.